OS, Objective-C, Swift, all that good stuff, moved on to full stack. So Node, Express, Mongo, Angular 1, and then eventually onto React, and then your typical Ruby on Rails, Python, Django, stuff like that. And I work primarily with early stage startups. That's my background. That's what I've been doing as a contract engineer since about 2012. Alex Kupse? Okay, sorry. And Monica were generous enough to offer this demonstration as a React demo, so thank you to them for that. And I hope you find this useful and constructive. Before I begin, what percentage of the room raise your hand if you have a Mac or a MacBook. Okay, what about PCs? Okay, the PC experience might be a little sketchy, so if there's any bugs or anything like that on the PC, I apologize. So hopefully we can work through them. So we'll just cross that bridge when we get to it, so we'll see. I am the founder of this startup, Turbo360. I launched this about 6 months ago. It's going okay. Turbo360 is a fully serverless web deployment environment. So basically the idea is you can run your Node Express projects without actually running Express. You can deploy it on Turbo, which is just a straight abstraction to AWS Lambda. That's all this is. So you can deploy all your projects on a web basis onto Turbo, and it goes to Lambda, and Lambda runs your websites. Does that make sense? So I want to go through a simple React Redux website today, deploy it on Turbo, and call it a day. So first thing we're going to do is have you go to Turbo360 and sign up so I can pump up my numbers to my investors. And then that way, that's going to send you an invitation to the Slack channel, which is here. So accept the invitation, and then we're going to share code on the Slack channel. That's the real reason. After you do that, open up your terminal. And before I get into some actual code, how many people out here have experience with JavaScript, React, Node, all that good stuff? Awesome, good. So I'm going to move at a pace that I consider commensurate with that experience. So if I'm going too fast, just raise your hand and say you're going too fast. Okay, so let me know when you're done with the registration, and then we're going to do a couple installs and then off and running. When you're done with the registration, just raise your hand so I can get a good sense of where we are.
I have another question.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
When I click the sign up button, nothing happens.
Down here?
Mm-hmm.
Which one are you trying to sign
If you hit login where it says if you don't have an account sign up, that one doesn't work.
Okay, yeah, I'll take care of that. So that worked? We're good to go? While we're all doing this, I started doing React about 2 years ago. Summer 2015 is when I first touched React. The reason I got onto it is because I started seeing the word React pop up over and over again on Hacker News. Friends were telling me about it. You told me about React, Alex, 2 years ago. And I didn't really know what it was, but I knew I need to stay ahead of the curve. That's all I know about my career is I got to stay ahead of the curve. I can't be playing catch up all the time. I have to identify where the curve is going and stay one step ahead. Because if you're playing catch up, you're already behind, right? The rest of the market caught up. And if you're a contract engineer like me, if you do a freelance work like I do, so basically every year, I have anywhere between 3 and 5 big clients, and that's my year, right? So that's my contract volume for a typical year. So every few months, I'm trying to solicit business. I'm dealing with potential clients and getting business in the door. I have to be a salesman as much as I am a programmer. But the thing is, if I'm not ahead of the curve, I'm quickly obsolete, probably within 2 years. So the only way I can protect myself against that is by identifying where the trends are going and staying on top of it. That being said, React Redux is clearly here to stay. There's no doubt. That even goes more so for React Native. I get probably twice a week React Native inquiries. American Express called me on Monday, React Native. Got another inquiry from a startup in Boston, React Native. It's all React Native, right? Well, in my experience at least. So the main lesson about what I do is I have to constantly stay on the edge of things, see where things are going, and make sure I stay relevant. That's less true if you're a full-time guy. So if you're working full-time, then you just want to be really good in what you do. So if you're working in a division of Facebook or Google, then you're working in that division and you want to be really good at that. But if you want to do what I do, it's more dependent on you to stay on top of things. Okay. So how are we with the registration? Okay. Open up your terminal, and we're going to do an installation. Do sudo npm. First thing we're installing is Webpack globally. So you're going to need to enter your password for the sudo. Okay, after that, we're installing Gulp, again, globally. If you already have this, you don't need to do it, but just in case you don't have it, we should do this. Webpack is what's called a bundler. Gulp is a build tool for building your assets from CSS, JavaScript into minified assets for optimized delivery, among other things, but that's the primary use of it. Okay, last but not least, we're going to install the Turbo CLI. So that's how you install the Turbo CLI. Oh wow, got all these new users. Okay. Okay, great. So now that you have that, obviously you have the most up-to-date version, but just to be sure, that's the current version of the Turbo CLI. So if you have anything prior to that, you need to update. I publish changes about twice a week, so it's just all the time. Okay, so let's get started. So cd to your workspace directory, wherever you do your programming. I'm just going to do this on the desktop. We're going to create a new Turbo app. Turbo, let's call it Stevens Demo. And here, what I've done in Turbo is I've included a few scaffolding options. One of them is a React scaffold option, which basically gives you the synonymous of create React app, including more stuff like a Webpack config, as well as Redux. So Redux is fully built into this. So this is not a beginner tool, but it's a good way to get used to React Redux. So if you're new to React Redux, but you've done Node Express before and just basic JavaScript like Angular 1, then you should be able to figure this out. So go ahead and do that, except this way. Do it right. Don't worry about these instructions we're going to do right now. So cd into the demo and run the npm install. So we're installing all the requisite packages: React, React DOM, React Redux, all that stuff. This normally takes about a minute. Has anyone here not worked with npm, Node Package Manager? Okay, so are we comfortable with this flow so far? Okay. So I do a lot of demos, about 1 or 2 a week, but it's always kind of hard to figure out the pace of the room, right? That's why I'm asking all these questions, because my demos are in New York City and they're open. So I get people who've never programmed before and people who program for a living in the same demo, right? So I need to kind of figure out the appropriate pace. Obviously, this being Stevens, I'm trying to calibrate properly, but still want to be sure. Oh, while this is going, let's create a corresponding project on Turbo. So this is my dashboard. I have a couple projects. I'm not going to create one now. I'm just going to reuse some of these. But what you should do is press this button right here, create app, and just give it an app name, whatever you want to call it. And when you do that, you should see a UI like this, okay? And what we need is the app ID, okay? This is how we connect our local source code to the Turbo environment so that we can deploy. It's a lot like connecting your local code to a GitHub repo remotely. Everyone here uses GitHub. It's a similar concept. We're just connecting our local to our remote. Okay? So by now the install should be done. Everyone else done? And we do turbo dev server just to make sure everything worked. Okay? And this is running in an actual Node Express server on localhost. So localhost 3000. And you should see this. This is a React project. So this automatically scaffolds React components for you, a very, very primitive React project, but just so you can get off the ground, just so you can get up and moving without setting up all these React defaults over and over again. Okay? Everyone good? If you actually look at the HTML source, if you've done React before, you'll recognize this. That's too much. Here are the React bundles. This is the entry point, and React takes over from there. So if you've done React before, you're probably very familiar with this sort of overall outline. All right? So now go back and kill the server by doing Control-C, or stop the server. Okay, make sure you have your app ID copied from the dashboard, and then do the following: turbo app, and like that. And now your local source is connected to your Turbo project on the remote. Okay, last but not least, we're going to do a quick Turbo deploy. I always do this just to make sure the entire environment is working first. And then once I confirm that, I can go ahead and begin programming. I'm going to remove this when I publish the next update, but Vertex is what I call the serverless environment that Turbo supports right now. So we were running a Node Express server a few seconds ago, right, on localhost 3000, but Turbo completely exists on a serverless environment that AWS Lambda supports. So what this is a full abstraction to AWS Lambda, where we run your entire backend website as a series of Lambdas. That's what's going on here. So when you deploy, you're not really deploying a Node Express project. You're deploying a facsimile that gets deployed on Lambda, which runs the Node Express APIs. And I wrote those APIs on top of the Turbo environment. So basically, whatever you do on Node Express, like res.json, res.render, I had to rewrite those APIs for Turbo's purpose so that you can render everything on Lambda. That was fun. So here's your staging link. Okay? So just confirm that it works on staging, and then we're ready to go. And this is a website currently hosted on Lambda, or Turbo, really, but whatever. Okay, how are we doing so far? So far, so good. So we're just making sure everything works, which hopefully it does. And if you click on some of these routes, like this JSON route right here. Here we're just getting some sample JSON. If you click on some of these, you'll see some query parameters, et cetera, et cetera. That's how the routes are connected. This is exactly like Node Express. Okay? So now let's go ahead and actually start programming. So here's my source code. Open it up in Sublime or whatever editor you use. Okay, so here's the Turbo scaffold with React already configured. The only difference between the React scaffold and just a regular scaffold is this src file right here, directory. This is where all the React code lives. So if we open this up, you'll see a full stack React source code structure, or whatever. And the index.js right here is where the entry point of React is. So if you click on that, you're looking at the component that we were physically looking at a few moments ago, the actual HTML, okay? If you look at the actual intro component right here, components intro, you'll probably recognize like the HTML we were just looking at, right? Welcome to Turbo, etc. Okay, so that's the structure of the project in Turbo, in a React Redux project. All this other stuff, constants, reducers, stores, whatever, that's all the Redux stuff. So we may or may not get to that today, depending on how fast we move. Okay. All right. Now, one of the big things my users so far have been sort of asking me is a quick and easy way to make things look better, because everyone struggles with design. At least hardcore programmers more spend time programming than designing. So you end up with all these sophisticated software and websites, but they look terrible. So what I did was I built in a themes integration. Right now we have 4 themes built in. So if we do Turbo, theme, hyperspace, we're going to use this one because I like this one better. And then run the dev server. Go back to localhost, and you should see this. Okay, so that's a theme that we pumped in right away. Okay, we're adding new themes about once or twice a week. If anyone wants a job creating themes, I need people to do that. So I've been doing that by hand. Anyway, now we have a theme integrated. However, this is not a React theme. It's pure HTML. So what we're going to do is take this theme and convert it into React for the purposes of learning React. It's a very good way to learn React, is taking an existing project and converting it into React. That's essentially how I learned it. Right? It sort of formalizes the concepts as you go through all the underlying pieces. So if we open up the code now, this HTML that you're looking at is inside the views directory, specifically the index.mustache. Mustache is a templating engine. So here is the HTML. So the React code is now gone. It's just raw HTML now, right? This is just a regular HTML project. So now what we're going to do is take all this and reformat it into React. Okay? Everyone with me on that? So let's get started. If we open up the index.js inside the source directory, right, this is the original entry point. So let's get all that HTML in here now. Okay? So inside the index mustache, we have our body tag starting in line 10. That's going to stay behind. And starting on line 12, all the way to the close of the body tag, let's grab all that and throw it into the React source code. So let's go ahead and grab all this. Down to the footer. You see what I highlighted? Okay. Let's just take all that out, leaving behind the body tag and the imports. All right. Now we have to reset up the React entry point. So here, we're going to create a root div that React will take over. Okay. So React will take that div and inject its own code, its JSX code. Everyone know what JSX means? Okay, cool. So we have some React experience in this room. That's good, right? Okay, so now keep in mind, the imports have also been washed out. It's no longer importing our React bundle, right? So if we look at our Webpack config, you'll see that the React entry point is here, and as it bundles the code, it spits the output over here in the public/dist directory. So let's go ahead and run that build so that we can confirm that it worked and then re-import it into the new template. All right. So here, turn off the server, open a new tab, and let's just do a quick Webpack build. You should see a couple green lines like this. That means it worked. If it didn't work, you see a bunch of red lines. I think that's pretty evident. Okay, so a lot of this works out of the box because Turbo just formats it for you to work out of the box. That doesn't mean you shouldn't know how this works, though. We should get into how Webpack configures stuff. But for now, it just gives it to you out of the box. So now we have public dist bundle, and here is the React output. Okay? So here we have two main bundles we have to care about, the commons and the app. All right, don't really worry about the distinction right now, but we need to import both of those, unless you already know what the distinction is. So here, let's see, let's get rid of these two. Okay, so here's where we re-import the React code. All right? And we're going to leave these behind because the theme actually depends on these other, just basic jQuery imports, standard stuff. Okay, so now if I run the server and reload the app, I'm going to see all that welcome to Turbo stuff, but with the CSS from the theme, right? So that's a good sign. That means the CSS properly imported. Everything still works from a React standpoint. Obviously, it looks terrible, but everything works, right? So now let's take all that code from the HTML, from the template, and put it in the components so we can get back to where we were. Okay, that's the next move, okay? So I'm going to turn off the server. Okay, opening up index.js in the source directory. So this is our entry point of the React. Let's get rid of the actual intro. Let's get rid of that. Let's create a div right here. It's important to remember that you have to have one div in the provider, or really in any React export, you have to have one div. And then you put everything inside the div. I often forget that and things crash. It's a very easy thing to forget, so just keep that in mind. And then paste all that HTML from before right in here. Okay, remove the comments because JSX will not play nice with these comments. Okay, this won't work out of the box. It's going to crash. Anyone by chance know why this will crash? No? Okay, so React or JSX in particular doesn't accept this word class. It's a reserved keyword, right? So we have to change it to class name. So what we do is we do a command F, or I'm sorry, command option F, so we can do a quick search and replace. So we do class equals, and replace it with class name, and just one quick step, get rid of all those. And then save that. React also, or JSX also doesn't like unclosed tags as well as style attributes. Those have to be reformatted. There are no style attributes here, so we're okay with that. It's always worth checking for unclosed tags. Excuse me. Which usually happens in IMG tags and input tags. So just watch out for that. I think we're okay on this theme, though. So now if we run Webpack again, if it didn't work, it'll crash here anyway, so we'll know. So that's good to go. Okay? And then let's go back to our server. And now we're back in business, but fully inside of a React code base. So that's good, right? Progress. Right? just make sure everything worked, which it does. That's a relatively seamless transition. Usually when I do this, it takes about 10 minutes to clean out all the bugs and stuff like that. But it's a simple theme, so. Okay, who got this working? Just raise your hand so I can figure out where we are and kind of how many people are keeping up. Okay. Yeah.
What is supposed to be in the mustache index?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so index mustache. That's where the React code will get rendered. And these two imports are the actual React bundle. And all the sort of HTML we had in between, we just took it out of here and put it inside the React component just to make sure everything works. And then we're going to carve it up into individual components because obviously we don't want that one big component. Yep.
Does Turbo Dev Server run Webpack?
You have to run it separately because I didn't want to do sort of too much. I kind of want to mimic a Node Express experience as much as I could. Yep.
Does it support hot reloading with React?
Sorry?
Does it support like Webpack and watch move hot reloading?
Oh, yeah. So I was going to show that next exactly. So here, we have to run Webpack again, right? Well, you don't really have to do that. You can just run Webpack W so that you can just keep it up and it's good to go. So now whenever I make changes, it'll update. So you're one step ahead. All right, so inside the index.js, we have all this JSX or HTML. Within a React project, this is not considered best practice. You want to carve this up into subcomponents, right? Just go ahead and do that right now. If we look at the actual rendered code, you'll see that we have a sidebar here. Well, that should really be its own component, right? So here, this sidebar right here, lines 20 through 31 on my code, that's really should be a component. So let's go ahead and create a component out of that. So cd to the src and then the components directory. So right now we are in that directory. We're going to create a new directory inside of that called presentation. cd into that. And then create the sidebar component. And while we're here, let's create an index component as well. Or not really a component, but just an index file. Okay, so once you've done that, highlight this chunk of code, just copy that. And inside the components, presentation, sidebar, let's create a very simple component that renders out those 10 lines of code. Okay? So we import React. Okay, so I'm guessing you can mostly piece together what's going on here, but we're creating a component called sidebar that renders this HTML or JSX if you want to be more technical about it. And don't forget to export so we can import this component inside of other components. Okay, so very, very simple component. Good. So now let's go back to the index. Oh, did I lose the connect? Damn it. I don't know what the... Like,
You slide your computer to the left more, just so it becomes
It's got to be like perfect.
yeah, I just gotta not move the computer at all, to be honest.
export on the sidebar.js?
Right there. Okay. So now we have our first component that we can import into other components. And really what you want to do is carve up your React code into subcomponents that you can import into other components. Kind of like building up like a Lego piece or whatever. So inside the index.js, in the source directory now, let's import that component. Sidebar. Components. Okay, and that should do it. So now we can render the sidebar here as the sidebar component, or theoretically. So let's try that. So let's get rid of this. Now what I always do when I'm doing this process is I reload the entire site without the component first, just to make sure I properly removed it, and then I insert the new one. So Webpack is still running, so that's good, right? So we don't have to reload that anymore, and let's do the turbo dev server. So let's use that as a backup because we got it working. So turbo dev server. Okay, sidebar is gone. That's what we want to see. And then let's put it back in here as the sidebar component. Okay, now we're back in business. Notice I didn't rerun Webpack. That's because it's watching, so that helps. So, okay. I'm going to make a quick indentation adjustment because my indents are off by 1 level, so that's always a pet peeve of mine. All right, now we're lined up. If you scroll down here, you'll see a footer component as well. Pretty obviously, this should also be its own component. I think we can all see that. Let's go ahead and create that. Let's get rid of this. Go back to the src components, and then presentation. And then just create a corresponding footer component, right? That's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, pretty much the same exact thing, but footer instead of sidebar, so pretty easy to understand, I assume. Don't forget the export, very easy to forget, at least for me. And then we go back to our index on the src, and we import the footer. So there's the import. And let me just rerun it, make sure the footer is gone. So make sure you're in the root level when you run the server. You have to be at the root level. All right, so the footer is gone. That's what we want to see. And then all right, back in business. That's good to go. So that's the general principle behind organizing your React components on a very simplified level. You want to carve it up into sort of reusable pieces that you can use in other parts of your code base. That's kind of what we're doing right now. So as you might imagine, let me just get rid of this comment right here. As you might imagine, a big React project will have a whole bunch of these. So you don't want to have 30 lines of imports. So what I normally do is inside this presentation index.js, I export everything in there. don't have to do this. I just find it to be cleaner code. It makes things easier to import. So here inside the index, what we can do instead is and then get rid of those. Those two are the same. So this just makes it easier to import a bunch of stuff. All right. So if I reload, just make sure we didn't break anything. Okay. So now a lot of this stuff I'm just going to get rid of. Everything up until here. So I'm just going to render this block and that's it. The reason being that this block has some user interactivity. So we want to get to this. Right, so we want to deal with user interaction and capturing data, rendering data, all that stuff. So we want to get rid of the other stuff. So find where it begins right here and just get rid of everything above it. Okay. Webpack is still going, and then re-render. Okay, so that's going to be our actual UI. Okay, and just like the other components, these should be carved out into their own components as well. But this one's a little bit different. This component handles data, right? Because we're going to be typing into this and capturing the data. So this is not as simple as a component as a sidebar and the footer. Those are just pure like rendered components and that's it. They're basically glorified pictures. You just render them. So this component has a little bit more responsibility. So this is what we will consider a container component. So we want to put this in a different directory called container components, okay? Or containers, and then put the components in there. Let's go ahead and do that right now. The containers directory scaffolds right away, so we don't have to recreate another one. I don't think it matters if you do, but you don't have to. And then let's call this one the register component, because that's pretty much what's going on in that box. And just go back to the root level so you don't forget. Okay, so the process is basically the same. We just grab the code and put it in here just like before. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So grab the let's grab the entire div. Let's do this. That wrapper div, let's grab that whole thing, throw it inside the register component, and then render that. The containers component already has an index.js, so don't forget to export it there. These are very like small mistakes that come up again and again, so little things that you just want to keep in mind as you write code, I guess. I'm not going to use this users component, so let's just get rid of it. We're clearly not using that intro component anymore, so let's get rid of that. And then don't forget, this is from the containers directory, so obviously write containers. Okay, I'm going to just restart Webpack The reason I'm doing that is because I created a new file. So whenever you create a new file, you should restart Webpack because Webpack is only watching what was there before, right? So if you created a new file, by default, Webpack isn't watching it, right? Because it didn't exist. So you should restart Webpack in that case. And then try the dev server. Okay, so it's gone because I didn't render it, so I just made sure that all the code is properly removed. And then here, put it back in, make sure everything works. Good? So now our project is starting to take more of a proper React structure. We have our components organized into containers, presentation. Presentation components are just, they're pretty much what they sound like. They just render content, and that's it. They're basically glorified HTML. But the container components they actually deal with the data. So here, let's see. Okay, now here is the register component. Normally what would happen is these would be also stripped out into their own sub-presentation components because container components literally contain presentation components as well as state data. So normally you would do that with this HTML right here. I'm not going to do that tonight just for the sake of time, but understand that that's what would normally happen next. All right? You would carve this out into their own sub-presentation components and then import those into here so that they contain presentation components, hence the name containers. Okay? But for now, we're going to start dealing with data. So here I'm setting up the state of the component. The state property inherits from the component class that React provides you. The state property of a React component is extremely important. Basically, React is called React for a reason. It reacts to changes in state. So whenever there's a change in anything in here, the component itself will react to it by re-rendering its inner contents. So if I make a change to the state, automatically this function will recall. It'll go again, right? That may seem a little superfluous at first. Like that might actually sound inefficient at first because what if you're looping through like a 1,000 item array and you're making changes to all that and putting it in state? You don't want it to render 1,000 times, right? That's not a good idea. Well, it only re-renders if there's an actual change in the visual content, right? So it'll call render and then there's going to be a check. What's called the diffing engine checks whether or not a render is actually necessary. And if it's not necessary, it won't actually re-render. So it seems a little inefficient at first, but it's actually quite efficient. Okay? And it'll only re-render the pieces that need to be re-rendered. So let's see. Here we have name, email. We're going to ignore the message, and we're going to do send message. We're going to bind these two inputs to handlers, as well as this button, make sure that everything's properly being captured. So inside the state, we want to have a name object as well as an email object. Why not use the message? I don't really see why not. So let's throw that in there too. So okay, here are the name and email inputs as well as the message one. So inside each one of those inputs, we need to bind change handler so that it can the component can hear when stuff is being changed in there. So let's create a method called update visitor that this input will call every time the user types anything inside the input. So obviously this method doesn't exist yet, so let's go ahead and create that. Okay, we're just doing a console log just to confirm that it works. Okay, so everything here is still good. Reload the site. This time open the console. Option Command I if you don't know how to do that on Macs. I don't know PCs. And here, just make sure the looks like jQuery is not being properly. All right, we're going to ignore those jQuery warnings for now because it doesn't impact the React code. But here, as I type in the input, you should see this output. Okay, does anyone have that working? Cool. All right, so got some people following along. Let's bind the same function to the other two inputs. So email and text area. Again, ignore these jQuery warnings. It's not that important for now. And then name, email, message. So they're all properly connected. Obviously, we can't distinguish right now which one's which, so let's fix that problem right now. So inside the function, we can pass in arguments like any other function. So here, we're going to pass in name, email, and message. Okay, so we're passing in a string argument, basically distinguishing which input is being typed into. The function declaration doesn't account for that argument, so let's fix that. So there's the argument inside the function declaration now. So now this field right here will tell us which input is being typed into. All right. Name, email, message. So now we know what's being typed into. Good? Pretty simple? Okay. So now let's use this to update the state. So, so again, is anyone here never done React before? Okay, so this is a pretty important distinction here. So like, we're dealing with the state object right here, right? And if you're going to update the attribute right here with the name, email, or message, whatever, the intuitive thing to do would be this. Right, plain old JavaScript, object manipulation. Right, it's a very standard object, taking a key, assigning a value, whatever. But in React, this is a no-go. You don't want to do this in React. In React, what you want to do is always reset the state. When you reset the state, that's what triggers the re-render. So what you should really do instead is this command right here, set state, is what invokes the re-render. Okay? So when you make a change to state in this fashion, then the re-render will be called, and if it's necessary, it'll actually re-render. Make sense? So it gets a little bit hairy if you're dealing with a lot of objects in state, especially if the objects aren't like one-to-one, like a key to a value, key to value. If this is an object unto itself, then you got to make a copy, update the copy, and then reset the state. Okay? Okay, so just updating whatever attributes are there. All right, you guys got that? Just simple, just set states. Where's that button? Send message. Here it is. Okay, so here is the send message button right there. So on that, what we're going to do is bind a click handler, which will show us the current value stored in state, just to make sure everything is properly being captured. Let's go send message. Okay, notice that's on click, not on change, so just make sure you capture that distinction. And then let's create the actual method so that we're not calling nothing. Okay, notice that the send message tag is an anchor tag directed towards the hashtag, this href. So the prevent default prevents that from happening. Like, we don't actually want to go to that tag. We could just as easily call that a button too, but however we want to handle that. Okay, and a quick console log just to make sure everything worked. Good? Everything good? Okay. You may have noticed I'm always checking in on Webpack. It's a good habit to build in React because basically Webpack is your permission. Like, if Webpack crashes, nothing's going to run. So what often happens when I first started out was I just didn't have this habit built in. So I would code for like a half hour, not realizing I made a mistake on minute 2. So the ensuing 28 minutes, I'm building code on stuff that doesn't work. And then I won't remember what I did a half hour ago, and debugging that's a nightmare. So I'm always checking Webpack before I reload the page. Okay, and so there are the values captured in the state. So we have everything properly and accurately captured. Okay? How's that so far? Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to go off script here a little bit and try something different. Let's, instead of registering a user, let's have this send a text message to a phone number that you specify. Okay? Just why not? So, has anyone here heard of Twilio? Mm-hmm. Okay. Has anyone here used Twilio? Okay, so we're going to use the Twilio SDK to have this send a text message to a number that you specify. Okay, we'll use the email field for a phone number, and we're going to use the message for the actual body. So let's go with that. Okay, so let's see here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function. Yeah. No, let's do it inside here. So let's import. Let's see. All right, let's import the Twilio SDK. You guys can go ahead and use my keys. I don't really care. So we'll put those keys inside the Slack channel. Just don't go crazy on the keys. It costs a penny per, but if you end up sending 1 million messages, then please give me some money for that. It's like 3/4 of a penny per message, I think. So I think I can handle that for now, but don't, like, create a whole enterprise application on that using my keys. Thank you. So, let's see here.
That's going into video. You're gonna want to revoke those.
That's fair. That's a good point. Yeah. Funny story. My AWS keys were hijacked a couple weeks ago. That's a bad day.
That's why I put your keys in environment variables.
Right. Well, no. What I forgot was I committed the code by mistake, and I realized it right away. I was like, oh crap! I committed the code. Let me just roll that back. It doesn't matter. GitHub already caught it.
Yeah.
So I just took down the entire repo.
There's bots that just scan.
Yeah. That's what happened, right? That's how you learn. So, like I knew I made the mistake. I just thought I fixed it quickly enough, but I didn't. So I wake up to a $4,000 bill on Amazon, and my typical Amazon bill is like $75. So obviously something happened. And phone calls, customer support, blah blah blah. Finally, they took care of it. Yeah, never do that again. Okay, so open up your API.js file inside your routes directory. You want to create a simple API route to handle Twilio calls. So inside here, let's do a get route. Let's say SMS. If you've done Node Express, this should look very familiar, right? We're just creating a get handler for this specific path, which will render this JSON for now, and then once we confirm that, we'll just hook it up to the Twilio stuff, right? So if you look at the app.js, you'll see that that route's already connected. It's a sample route that I just scaffolded right away, so you can just go right to working on it. So there's no need to create a whole new route for it. So if we go to localhost, the route is connected to the /API path. So if we do /API SMS, we should see that JSON. So now we know it worked. So let's go ahead and actually connect it to a Twilio message. So I'm just going to use some pre-scaffolded SMS Twilio SDK stuff. It sounds to me like everyone here has like SDK experience. So rather than go through all the nuances of this, I'm just going to assume people can decipher this. I will just put it on Slack though right now. So okay, so the Twilio SDK automatically returns promises. So I was wondering if I need to import the promise library, but I don't have to. So inside the API.js, rather than this, let's do that. And for now, let's hard code these parameters just to make sure it works, right? So let's do, this is a test message. And I'm going to put in my phone number there, but when you import it, put in your phone number. Unless everyone wants to send me a text. But. And this is the Twilio number that I bought, so that's what that has to be, that number, right? So, and make sure I didn't forget anything here. Okay, very simple Twilio integration, right? So everyone can kind of see. Well, you tell me if this is not making sense, because I'm just assuming people understand what I'm doing, right? So if this makes sense, or if it doesn't make sense, just say like, I don't really know what's going on. So I'm going to put this in Slack right now. I'll put it right here in the general channel. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that. No, there's no one bad on the channel. So, right. All right. So just grab that, put it inside your route, and then just change that number right here so that you get the text instead of me, so that you know it worked, right? Or it didn't work. All right, let's try it. Okay, so that's the callback from Twilio. And there's the text message. So we're good to go on that. So did you guys get that? Nice, all right. So now once we hit send on the React side, let's invoke that route and so that we can send a message just for fun, all right? So again, I'm going a little off script here, but I just want to experiment. I'm just freestyling basically. So let's see. So here, inside the register.js function now, right here, when you hit that button, that's when you want to invoke that route. Does that make sense? So inside there is where we want to hit that API endpoint. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do one more step before I get to this. I'm going to deploy it to a live environment or staging environment just to make sure it works on the actual environment rather than just localhost. So let's go ahead and try that right now. So turn off the server. So what Vertex does when you deploy is it takes your environment variables and it sets those as well, but it does not deploy the env file. Those never go up. So if your code base ever does get jacked, like mine did, the bad guys won't find the env file, at least. So you're covered there. It basically just sets it in the environment. Okay. So here's my staging endpoint. This is like my localhost 3000. So we do /API/SMS and make sure that that works. So here's the home page /API. Good. Got the callback, and I didn't see it yet. There it is right there. Good. You know, same thing. All right. So now we're confident everything works on both environments. Let's go ahead and connect it on React in the back end. So here, when you hit that button, that's when you want to make that call, that API call, right? So we need a way of making that call. So I use a request module called Super Agent. Bunch of request modules out there, Axios, request, Super Agent, whatever you like. I'm going to do Super Agent because I just use that all the time. So npm install the module. Okay, and then right here we're gonna make the call. So again, I'm sort of just taking shortcuts here. Like normally this wouldn't happen right here, right? This would happen inside of what's called an actions file, and that would reference another utility class that makes these kind of requests for you. For the sake of time, I'm just sort of cutting corners. So we're just gonna make the call direct from the component. This is clearly not best practice, so I'm pointing out the areas where I'm just trying to save time, but more just to show you the functionality that you can implement right away. So here, we just make a GET request to the route. Oh, query. Okay. Very simple sort of super agent API call. Just a GET request to the endpoint. Here's where you pass in your parameters. So when you grab the text from the message body, as well as the phone number or whatever, those go in here, and when we do that. And then here are the callbacks. So standard, it looks like a promise. It's actually not, but it looks like a promise like architecture. So Webpack is still running. I'm just going to give it another build just to be really safe about it. Run the dev server. And then going back to localhost, we're not doing any kind of validation, right? So like it doesn't matter if the user leaves it empty or not. So we could just hit that send button, to be honest, right? So I'm going to open the console just to be safe. Message sent. And then there it is again. Good. Anyone get that working? One more time? Yeah, sure. So here is the code that I put on Slack. So you can just take that off Slack and just tweak the variables for your own messaging. Now, this is obviously hard-coded, right? So what you really want to do is input the variables from the input fields, right? The name, the email, and pass those off to here. So those will go in the query parameters. Is this something that you want to see? Is this hard for you? I can't really decipher what's hard and what's not at this point. But that's what you would do next, right? Because right now, it's the same message, the same phone number every single time, right? So this is the part that I just put right on Slack. So you can just copy and paste. In fact, please do that now because I don't like the fact that I put the account variables on Slack. So I'm going to take that down. It's like I got to learn the hard way over and over. You know? What happened? What?
You might have to generate a new key too.
Oh, I'm going to have to reset all this. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. I'm aware of that. Okay, I'm going to cut it off for here for now because if I get into the actual Redux side, we're looking at another hour and a half. So that being said, anyone have any questions? Anyone want to see a repeat of a code sample? Anything that wasn't clear? Yeah.
Are you going to update to React 16?
I'm going to wait on that. Probably about another month. Because I'm still working on building in core functionality. And then once I get all that built in, I'm going to upgrade. But that's a good question. Anything else? All right, great. Well, if I do this again here in particular, I'll basically just build off this. So I'll just keep on moving to the next sort of concept, the next stage. This code in this video, I was recording the whole thing. It will go up on my website. So every demo I do, I just put on the website. If you go here to the tutorial section, all my demos and stuff, they all go here, okay? It's mostly free. About 25% of them are premium. That's a one-time $35 payment, but you guys probably don't need the premium. The free is good enough because the concepts are pretty clear as it is. But all the material I do goes here, including the actual source code. So the source code that I just wrote here will be included in this right there as a download. So if you want to do that. That's pretty much it. Yep.
So how does Turbo 360 play into all this? Is it just like a hosting platform?
Correct, but it's hosted completely on a serverless architecture. Okay. So there's no actual servers. It's completely hosted on AWS Lambda. Has anyone here heard of Lambda? So Lambda is a serverless architecture that AWS basically invented, but there are more and more serverless architectures coming out. So what I tried to do is write a full stack web abstraction of Lambda so that anyone here can deploy their full stack apps on Lambda by virtue of Turbo 360. Makes sense? The reason I did that is because the Lambda expenses are like laughably small. Like I can do 10 million requests for like $75. It's like nothing. So if I can basically sell web services to other people and take a markup off that, that's a good business model. It's a pretty obvious business model. So it's a matter of making that experience quick, easy, and robust. Does it do everything you need to do? Does it hide your environment variables? Does it support SSL? Can you route DNS to it? Like all that stuff it does work. So the rest is just making the experience easy and simple enough so that people will do it, because you can do all this right now through raw AWS Lambda. That obviously I'm doing it. I'm showing it to you. However, the configuration is a bit of a pain. I wouldn't call it an albatross, but for a beginner, it's a non-starter. If you're a beginner programmer, just forget it. You're not going to get there. But if you have to basically be already a professional or like a hardcore coding guy to do all this on Lambda already. Now, one good thing that I do want to point out about the Turbo environment is that it's a full Lambda abstraction. So what that means is the following. There's no secret sauce going on underneath the hood where Turbo does stuff to your code. Right? That's not happening. Your code is truly deployed and run. Your code. Like I don't do anything in between. So what that means is if at any point you decide you don't like Turbo anymore, or more accurately, you want to run it on your own Lambda system, your own Lambda architecture, because you guys are going to become professional programmers. You're going to want to do things on the lowest level, I assume, which means you're going to want to do this on actual Lambda integration with what's called the API gateway. You can do that. So you can just take your Turbo code like off the platform as a zip file and literally redeploy it. And basically all you need is a configuration file to make it work on your own architecture. And I haven't written that script yet, but that'll take me like a day where you can just get your configuration file, kind of like your manifest file, and then just redeploy that on your Lambda with it, and you're off and running. So what I'm referring to is what's called vendor lock-in. There's no vendor lock-in on this architecture. So again, if at any point, a lot of these sort of web deployment companies, I should say, like Meteor. Has anyone here used Meteor? Yeah, that's a very, it's a very well-known like web deployment company. Firebase, we've all heard of Firebase. Right, Firebase is it's kind of a similar idea where you can just deploy your entire full-stack web application. The problem is with Firebase and with Meteor is you have to use their APIs and their SDKs. If you have a Firebase application running a full like architecture, like a full API and everything, and you decide one day, this is not working for me, I want to take it off and go on to either Heroku or AWS, not going to happen. Right? There's too much lock-in. And for Meteor, that's even more the case. So there are like communities of Meteor developers who are very, very good at Meteor. But that skill doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one into like just pure Node Express, AWS, whatever. Does that make sense? So it creates a bit of a lock-in. So Meteor has to become extremely popular. It has to become mainstream, hit critical mass, for it to have sort of professional commercial viability. So, in the past 3 years, I've been primarily a full-stack web developer. Alex, you actually work with me on some of these projects, right? Like, in that time, I averaged about 5 contracts a year. None of them have been Meteor except one. I've had one Meteor contract in those 3 years. That's 1 out of roughly 15, right? Everything else is standard Node React, or not React, Node Express, excuse me, Ruby on Rails, Python Django, the usual stuff. Does that make sense? So the idea here is to not confine you to a specific architecture. It's not like I can take a Meteor project and just throw it on Heroku. That's just not how it works. Same as Firebase, right? So that's the idea behind the Turbo architecture. And then beyond that, if you want to run your own serverless using Turbo code base, you can do that. It'll take a little bit. It'll basically be a couple hours of like headaches, and then once you're off and running, you're good to go. Yeah.
Could you explain serverless architecture? Because I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, it's a brand new concept. So Amazon Web Services invented what's called Lambda, which is basically serverless architecture. I think it's 2015, so right around there. And basically the idea is you don't deploy actual servers, hence serverless. The infrastructure runs the servers for you. So it's a bit of a misnomer. There are servers, obviously, but you don't configure and manage them. You don't actually deploy. You don't create any EC2 instances. Does anyone here know EC2? Okay, so you don't create EC2 instances, you don't create droplets on DigitalOcean, you don't create dynos. You just deploy your code base onto the serverless platform, in this case Lambda, and they run the requests for you via their servers, which runs in what's called containers. Okay, the primary benefit for a serverless architecture, if you're going right to serverless, like let's say you're not using Turbo at all, you're just going right to serverless. The primary benefit is that you pay for literally only what you use in terms of requests and compute. So I'm running 3 or 4 EC2 instances to support this right now, 3 or 4 depending on my load balancer. And on an average month, I pay about 75, 80 bucks. 70 of those go to EC2. And that's where the bulk of my costs are. The other 5 or 6, that's Lambda, and that's it. And like domain name stuff, and that's it. So the costs are very, very low in comparison. In fact, in the next couple months, maybe 2 or 3 months, I'm going to take this whole thing and just run the whole thing on Lambda. Because why am I paying 75 bucks a month if I don't have to, right? So to prove the concept even further. It's a good thing to look into. I would recommend just researching serverless and AWS Lambda and just what's going on, because this is certainly the cutting edge in terms of web development, just general development. I personally predict that it'll become mainstream development within 3 to 5 years, simply because the cost reductions are too compelling. It's not like a 40% savings, it's like a 2,000% savings. So the cost savings are so compelling, it's just a matter of who can deliver it to market better. That's it, right? Kind of like what Heroku did 6, 7 years ago. Like who can deliver to market the best? And that's a good thing to be thinking right now, because the way things are now, Ruby on Rails, REST API, stuff like that, that's obviously still very good and very relevant skills, but everything changes at some point. I started programming 7 years ago. What I did 7 years ago just doesn't play into today at all. The languages I use, like Objective-C, like nobody uses Objective-C anymore. I was an iOS dev. 7 starting out. So, but yeah, I would recommend just basic Googling. So, any other questions?
Does Turbo 360 have continuous integration?
Not yet. Those are all things I'm working in. But the continuous integration is certainly This is why I kind of need hands on deck. I'm the only developer on Turbo 360.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's a lot of sleepless nights. A lot of just I haven't seen daylight in a while. Like, I need to find help. So if anyone here understands this at a deeper level, please contact me. Please contact me. If anyone understands this at a level that I'm explaining at the lowest level, email me. We are raising money. We're up to about 55 large right now. That should triple in a couple of months. And that's still not a lot of money, but it's enough to support a developer. So that this is sort of on the way. I am Turbo 360. I have one other guy who's helping me with like Matthew. You met Matthew. He helps me with like marketing and whatnot. But everything else is me. So it's a lot of just days in my apartment coding for 29 hours straight. Like it's just a lot of that. So, any other questions? Good. Well, I hope you guys found this helpful. I hope you learned something, and I'll let you know if I'm back.